Doubt. How does one overcome doubt when you're also religious? Like, I know when I was religious, I had doubts that plagued me all the time. It caused me to go in and out of strict religious adherence at several points in my life. So what's the best way to handle doubt, just in general? I would say that handling doubt should come from deep inner reflection of what you believe and why you believe it, having good reasons for believing in the things that you do. But this guy today is going to have a different take on doubt. In fact, this is going to be a masterclass on how to indoctrinate yourself back into the faith if you find yourself slipping out. So, if you want to fuck around and find out what's the best way to indoctrinate myself back into a religion, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Like I said, today we are going to be talking about doubt, and I'm going to be analyzing this pastor, apologist. I'm not exactly sure what he is, but he is going to be telling us, well, he's going to be telling religious people how to properly handle doubt and what they need to do in order to overcome their doubts in Jesus or doubts in religion in general. I'm quite interested in this because I know that a lot of religious people probably have problems with doubt, even if they don't want to admit it. But there are people at times that admit having doubts and everything like that. So I think this could be really useful information to really pick apart and analyze this guy's suggestion for just continuing to indoctrinate yourself into the religion despite your doubts, which is essentially the message of the video. All right, let's start this masterclass.
In today's video, I'll answer your question, how can I overcome the fact that I am struggling with faith? Then afterward, as always, I'll share some helpful resources, so stick around until the end. Many people struggle with their faith at different times in their lives. Some of the most committed and godly leaders have struggled with doubts, just like everyone else. The very essence of faith is to believe in that which we cannot see. As physical beings, we tend to put faith in what we experience with our senses.
Well, I mean, typically, yes, we believe in things that we can touch, taste, feel, and we can experience in general. But I mean, we also believe in things that are past those senses. Like we believe in X-rays, gamma rays. We believe in things that we can't see, perceive, or experience with our own human senses, but we can construct different instruments in order to detect these things as existing. And so we know that these things exist because they are detectable in reality. If you can't detect something in reality, then guess what it is? It's not real, or at least it's not real in the way that, you know, we can actually experience it, or real in a way that actually comports with reality. Like, if it isn't real, then why believe in it? I feel like there are plenty of religious people out there, probably not watching this video. There's plenty of religious people out there that portray this believing in non-real things as a virtue. Like, the Bible itself says that it's better to believe without seeing, or believe without proof, rather. That's what Jesus actually said to the doubting Thomas guy, I think it was, that in that story. Basically, that the believer that believes without actually receiving any kind of evidence or anything like that, that person's actually better off in Jesus's eyes. It's definitely emphasized this whole not having evidence for the belief, for one. And that causes a lot of doubts in people, that causes a lot of problems. And it's because it doesn't seem to comport with reality. And if it doesn't comport with reality, then why should you believe in it? What's the good reason for believing in non-real things? I don't know.
Spiritual realities are not tangible and must be experienced outside our senses. So when that which is tangible and visible seems overwhelming, doubts can shroud that which is invisible.
I mean, I think that doubts can give you a good sense of what is real and what is part of reality. Like, if you have doubts about a certain thing existing, I have doubts about whether or not Jesus exists. And how do I deal with those doubts? I look for evidence that proves Jesus exists. Like, it's not that I want Jesus to exist or to not exist. I just want to know the truth of reality in that particular context. And so I look at the evidence. If there's no evidence to believe in either Jesus existing or any other thing that you can think of right now, if there's no reason to believe in it, then why is it seen as a virtue to like believe in things without reason or without evidence? I don't understand the religious mindset in this situation. I don't understand why it's better to believe without evidence or believe without something being proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. Doubt is a very useful tool in order to understand our reality. If you doubt something, definitely question it and have good reasons for believing in the things that you do. I don't think that this is a radical statement to make.
The first aspect to consider is the object of faith. The word faith has become popular in recent years, but the popular meaning is not necessarily the same as the biblical meaning. The term has become synonymous with any religious or irreligious adherence, regardless of whether there is foundational truth upon which to base such adherence.
Okay, so faith, it's a foundation of truth-based faith. I feel like this is we're going to get into a weird situation here where it's both you don't have evidence to believe in this thing, but you should obviously believe in it, but also we have a lot of evidence to believe in this thing. This just sounds like some kind of illogical reasoning. I don't know where he's going with it, but this should be interesting because there's simply no foundational truth to Christianity. Like there's no historical truth to it. There's nothing that backs any of the actual faith part of Christianity up. You can have faith in Christianity, but don't sit there and pretend like you have these mountains of like foundational truths that sit underneath Christianity. Like that just simply doesn't exist. And if you're going to say that it does, then you should have the evidence to back that up. What's the evidence that proves that these are foundational truths or whatever that props your religion up? You should definitely have evidence for that. So what's your evidence? That should be the question. If you're doubting anything, always ask, what is the evidence that supports this conclusion? And if you don't have evidence to support your conclusion, then don't believe in it. It's really that simple.
In other words, someone could claim faith in dandelions for spiritual healing, and that claim would be considered equally viable to the Christian's claim that the Bible is God's inspired word.
Because that is. I mean, the one person is just ad hoc saying this flower heals shit, and you're just ad hoc saying that God wrote the Bible. I don't see how these things are different. Like they're both magical claims about shit. How are they different? They're both magical claims. I'm not understanding.
So when struggling with faith, it is vital to define the object and reasonableness of that faith. All faith claims are not equal. Before we can be secure in our faith, we must answer the question, my faith is in what?
I'm really interested to know what he considers faith, because a lot of the times when religious people talk about faith, on the one hand, they talk about blind faith and blind faith being a virtue, but on the other hand, they talk about evidence-based faith. Now, faith, if you go by the dictionary definition, just simply means the complete trust or confidence in someone or something. So if you have complete trust or confidence in someone or something, then you have faith in those things, which is different from the religious kind of faith. Because I feel like one of the hallmarks of especially Christian faith is that you don't have evidence for God, or you don't have evidence for Jesus and his resurrection and everything like that. Even though they don't have evidence for believing in Jesus, his resurrection, or God, it's seen as a virtue for them to believe without that evidence. So it's a good thing. Jesus even makes this point in the Bible. I'm really interested to understand what he thinks about faith in general, because he seems to be saying that his faith is based on evidence and facts and truth, but yet we know that Christianity is not based on those things. We know that there's no evidence for the claims of the Bible, especially that God wrote the Bible. That's a bullshit claim. None of these things are actually true. So how can Christianity be built on truth? And therefore, that's why you have faith in the Bible. Doesn't that also sort of change the meaning of faith in this particular context? Because there's the religious version of faith, which I think is really just blind faith. But then if you talk about having complete trust and confidence, like in the Bible or in God, and you're saying that that's evidence-based, then that's not the kind of religious faith that most people adhere to whenever they're talking about faith. I don't know. I feel like this is a giant equivocation on the word faith at this point.
Many hold to the idea of having faith in faith. Faith itself is seen as the object rather than God himself. The biblical purpose for faith is to bring us into the presence of God. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6 says, "And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him."
Okay, so I feel like this is now getting into the whole thing of, well, you first have to believe in God in order to find the evidence for God. So if you're an atheist, you must first not be an atheist in order to have evidence for God. This doesn't make a lot of sense to me because as an atheist, I'm constantly trying to find evidence that proves a God exists. I'm pretty Gnostic about the Christian version of God. Like, I'm pretty sure that God doesn't exist. I will make that as a positive claim. And, you know, if you want to fight me in the comments, let's throw fisticuffs down there. But I don't see how trying to convince people to believe in God, you start with, well, first you got to believe in God. It seems like he's trying to bypass like a lot of the argumentation that people put forth, like all of the problems that we have with this idea of God to begin with. Like he's trying to circumvent it by being like, well, first you got to believe in order to get the evidence. I'm sorry. I'm not going to buy the product first, like invest in a lot of myself into the product without being given evidence that this product actually exists.
We can only find him when we come to him through faith in his Son. Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 13 says, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart."
Yeah. So basically you have to believe in God first and then you're given evidence. That is not how anything should work. This is fucked up kind of argumentation here for getting people to believe in God. So this video is not for atheists. This video is not for anybody that's not already in the faith. So what is he trying to say here to people? That if you have doubts about God's existence or you're looking for evidence, you're not actually putting God first or something like you don't actually have God in mind first. Like, is that what he's saying? He's saying that apparently as a believer, if you're having doubts about God's existence, then that's a problem. Like, it's a problem that you're even doubting, because obviously if you believed with your full heart, your full chest here, if you did it with your full chest, then you would obviously have all the evidence that you need. So, I mean, you doubting is actually a bad thing. I feel like that's what he's saying at this point, that because you're doubting, that means you don't have your heart full of God. God didn't reach up your bunghole and put his hand into your heart and explode in there. Like, apparently that's what's required in order to get the evidence for God. So this is all leading into this whole self-indoctrination thing, this getting yourself back into the faith after you're slipping away from the faith. So basically go headfirst into the faith, devote yourself entirely to God, and then you'll get your evidence. It should not be that way. This is like I said, this is a fucked up way to reason with somebody, because you're basically saying, well, you just got to go full-throated into it and then you'll get the evidence. Like, it's just a way to self-indoctrinate.
God does not bless half-hearted attempts to know him. He desires that we pursue him with passion, the same way he pursues us. However, God understands our inability to exercise the faith we need at times. In Mark chapter 9, verse 24, a man admitted to Jesus that he wanted help with his unbelief. Jesus did not rebuke the man, but healed the man's child anyway. He honored the man's desire to grow in faith and was pleased that he, Jesus, was the object of that faith. So if we have the desire to believe what the Bible teaches, then we have the right foundation for continuing to fight for faith. God has given us countless evidences of his existence and character.
No, he hasn't. God has not given us any kind of evidence for his existence. He could provide that kind of evidence. He could definitely prove to us that he exists. Definitely. But does he? Not that I've seen. I've not seen any kind of real evidence for God's existence. But he just put up Psalm 19:1. Psalm 19:1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands." So basically this guy just said, but look at the trees. And that's his evidence for God. Apparently just looking at the sky and seeing that it's blue is proof enough for God. Here's the problem, is that if you're a religious believer, if you're a Christian and you think that this is a good argument, you need to have your head checked, because like when I look at the sky, I think about the physics that goes into the sky being blue or whatever color it happens to be at that point. I think of the weather and how weather systems work and how all of that is based around physics and the physics of it all. I don't see God anywhere in the natural world. Like, I don't see the need for a magical sky wizard to make sure that the gears of the natural world keep turning. There's just no spot in there that requires that. Like, where in the sky being blue is God? Is God in the wavelength of visible light? In particular, the wavelength of the color blue that is cast whenever the sun hits the atmosphere, and the light is refracted in different ways, and blue is scattered during the day. And then at sunset, many other different colors are cast because of the angle that the sun is at. All of these things are factor into my perception of reality. Now, does that take away the sense of wonder that I have when I see a pretty sky, or if I go and I take out the trash and I look up and I see a beautiful summer day? Doesn't take away from the fact that, I feel that sense of wonder. I still feel that, but I don't have to sit there and think that a magical sky wizard is the reason why that exists. Like, that in no way factors into my experience. I can experience the natural world and appreciate the natural world for the wonder that it is without having to have some magical sky wizard be the reason for it. I mean, I think that the natural world is a wonder itself because it does work without any kind of magical wizard. The fact that it works itself is the wonder. I feel like adding a magical wizard to make everything operate or make everything work, like, I feel like that detracts from the wonder. That soils the natural world. Adding this magical layer on top of it seems to degrade nature. It seems to degrade the ability of nature to just operate. I don't see how you can think, oh, this place is so awesome because of God, and not also think about all the other horrible shit that happens in the world and in reality in general. Like, how can you sit there and hyper focus in on this one beautiful experience? Like, I know that I said, oh, I can appreciate nature for what it is, but I also acknowledge how horrible nature can be. Christians don't do this. Christians don't acknowledge the horrible side of God in this particular aspect. They never acknowledge the fact that this God allows such horrible shit to happen, and that would be the problem of suffering. I'm not trying to get into the problem of suffering necessarily, but I'm just saying that Christians saying that, oh, look, the skies declare the glory of God, blah, 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 Psalm 19:1 bullshit. Like, when they say that, that's them hyper focusing in on the things that make them feel good about this world. And those things is the evidence that points them to God. Why also isn't, brain-eating worms or parasites that burrow into your eye socket? Like, why aren't those also things that are evidence for God? Why is it only ever the beautiful things that prove that God exists? Why is it always looking at the trees that proves that God exists? Why isn't it, look at that predator eating the shit out of its prey? God is good. None of that is evidence of God. That's my point.
Jesus fulfilled all prophecies necessary to validate his claim to be the Son of God.
So, as far as we can tell, Jesus didn't fulfill any prophecies. In fact, what we have are no miracles or anything like that existed prior to the Gospels. Paul never talks about any miracles being done by Jesus. It's literally just, the basic message of Christianity, that he died, he was buried, and he resurrected, right? All according to the scriptures, by the way. Let's just assume that there was a dude. We don't actually have any early reports of Jesus performing any of these miracles or anything like that. So what does that mean? Well, that means that we need to look at the Gospels with a more critical eye. The Gospels are going to be written at least by 70 CE. and afterwards. The only gospel that you should really consider is the Gospel of Mark. Mark is the first gospel, and all the other gospels are derived off of Mark, but we can get some interesting information from the other gospels. Like Matthew. Matthew is the one that's most explicit about his ties to the Old Testament. And what we can see in Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, they all make references to the Old Testament because that's where they got the information from. So it's not that Jesus actually did any kind of miracles or provided any kind of evidence for his divine sonship. The gospel authors read the Old Testament, and there were a number of different miracles that the prophets in the Old Testament did. So their thought process was, well, if Jesus is supposed to be this ultimate prophet, then he would have to do these things too. But he not only has to do them, but he has to be bigger and better about it, right? Because he's God's final prophet, the ultimate prophet or whatever. He is the one. So what they did progressively throughout the Gospels, if you go in chronological order as far as when they were written, you have Mark with Jesus, doing miracles in order to prove his divine sonship. Then later and later and later, you have this message culminating in Luke of not doing miracles necessarily to get people to believe. Like providing evidence is a bad thing, essentially. That's the entire point of the Lazarus parable in Luke. The entire point of the Lazarus parable in Luke is that no amount of evidence given to somebody that doesn't believe will make them believe. They literally just want to focus on people that are going to believe without evidence. And so that's portrayed as a virtue in the Bible by Jesus. But my point is that the gospel authors read the Old Testament and then crafted stories to have Jesus fulfill those miracles. So there's nothing historical about them, and that's not evidence for Jesus. It's evidence for creative writing in the first century. That's what that's evidence of.
The Bible has been proven true over and over again for thousands of years.
No, it hasn't. It simply hasn't. I don't know what evidence he's talking about, the Bible being true over and over and over for thousands of years. I have no clue as to what he could be indicating there.
We have all the evidence we need, but God leaves the believing up to us. It can be encouraging to remember that when we struggle with faith, we are in good company.
Yeah, I get it. You're in good company. Doesn't this kind of, if we go back to the earlier in the video, isn't this sort of subverting something they said earlier in the video? It's like, oh, well, you first have to believe in God in order to find the evidence for God. Now he's saying, oh, God's already provided all the evidence.
Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 says, "And without faith, it is impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him." We can only find him when we come to him through faith in his Son. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 13 says, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." God has given us countless evidences of his existence and character. The Bible has been proven true over and over again for thousands of years.
Okay, if he's provided all the evidence already, then there's no need for me to automatically believe in him in order to get the evidence, right? I feel like there's a couple of messages that are being sent here, and they're both antithetical to each other.
Elijah the prophet experienced such a struggle. One of the greatest prophets of all time had just called down fire from heaven, killed over 400 false prophets, and outran King Ahab's chariot, a feat that would have been the envy of any Olympic gold medalist. Yet the next chapter finds Elijah hiding in a cave, depressed and asking for death. After all those miracles, he gave in to fear and doubt because a wicked woman hated him. During times of stress and exhaustion, we can easily forget all that God has done for us.
What has God done for you? It's a stark difference, like the thing that he's talking about here compared to, our daily lives, right? Because he just compared this fictional story in the Old Testament of the dude calling down fire from heaven and killing a whole bunch of people. And like, he's obviously got evidence of some kind of God. And then later on, he has all these doubts and everything like that. And he's asking for death or whatever. This is not what religious people experience. At least it wasn't my experience, because it's not like I've ever had any kind of magical heaven fire get rained down on my enemies And then, the next day I'm like, does he really exist though? Like, I don't know. Did I hallucinate the giant balls of fire being shot from the heavens? It just seems weird to me that he is portraying the religious experience, the modern religious experience, as that. God is working these miracles in your life one day, and then the next day you're doubting whether or not he exists. Here's the reason why that happens. It's because religious people often think that very mundane coincidences or mundane things that happen in reality, or in some instances, things that they do for themselves, are miracles. If you get an A on a test, it is not God that got you that A. You are the one that got the A. You are the one that did the hard work, put in the hard work and got the A, right? You're the one that did that. If you get a promotion at work, guess who did that? You and your hard work did. Hopefully the hard work did. Hopefully you didn't like blackmail your boss like in Fight Club. I'm just saying that like if you get a promotion at work, then that is all on you. God didn't do that. But you see, religious people view these things as miracles. Getting a job, another miracle. Like all of these types of things are portrayed as being miracles to religious people. And then going back to what this guy said just a little bit ago about how God has already provided all the evidence that we need, the heavens declare the glory of God and all that kind of bullshit. You have miracles in your life, which are just mundane things that either you make happen or that just coincidentally and haphazardly happen. And then there's just the fucking sky existing, apparently. Those things should point you towards God. And then the next day you're like, yeah, but does he really exist? This is a normal thing because you start realizing like, oh, well, I did do a whole lot of late nights and I worked really hard at work. I kind of deserve that promotion because like I put in the time for it. You start realizing that there are perfectly reasonable explanations for the things that you consider to be miracles. That's all that happens. You start realizing how it's not a miracle that you found your keys underneath the couch. Like, that's not a miracle. God didn't help you find that shit. It just was there and you went looking for it. Like, that's it. He wants to portray these small little miracles as something from God because either he doesn't want to admit that people work hard and get promotions or get jobs or find their keys under their couch or whatever in the fuck. Like it seems like these types of Christians, they just don't want to admit that it wasn't actually God. It was actually them that did the hard work. And this guy in the video doesn't want you to realize that it is you that made that happen, that you are your biggest cheerleader in that aspect. Like you are the one that makes things happen for yourself. He doesn't want you to understand that because that's going to drive a wedge between you and your God belief. And it should. It should, because you don't need to give God credit for those types of things happening. For your hard work. You're the one that did it. You take the credit. Don't give it to fucking God. Fuck him. And as far as the evidence from Psalm 19:1, the heavens and all that kind of stuff, realizing that like physics is at play here and that we can naturally explain like everything that they use with the look at the trees argument, that should also drive a wedge between you and your God belief, especially if it's been portrayed to you that God is the reason for nature to exist in the first place. If we don't need a magical wizard in order to make shit work, then we shouldn't put a magical wizard in the mix.
John the Baptist was another who struggled with faith when at the lowest point in his life. Jesus had called John the greatest prophet. John had been selected by God before birth to be forerunner of the Messiah. He was faithful to that calling all of his life. Yet even John, after being imprisoned and sentenced to die, struggled with doubts about Jesus' identity. He sent messengers to ask Jesus if he was truly the one sent from God.
Yes. And this is for theological reasons. Like it allowed Jesus to have an exposition on the evidence that he is the Son of God. I mean, this is a teaching moment in the theology. This is not a historical like account of anything. And it's not that John expressed any kind of doubts in either God or Jesus for that matter. This is a fabricated account that was meant to teach some theological concept about Christianity and about the person of Jesus that's portrayed in the gospel. That's the reason for it. Understanding this shouldn't necessarily cause you to lose your faith, but I would hope that it does indeed strengthen your doubt. Like I'm definitely here right now trying to strengthen your doubt in all of this bullshit in the Bible, because you should be doubting it. You should be looking for the evidence to support the idea that any of this represents anything in history. I get that religious people will probably see me as being malicious in this by strengthening a person's doubt, but I think doubt is a good thing. This guy in the video thinks doubt is a bad thing, and he just wants you to continually indoctrinate yourself back into the faith if you ever feel any kind of sense of doubt. I'm saying embrace the doubt. Find the answers that you need in order to believe in the things that you do believe in. And if you can't find those answers, or the answers aren't pointing to what you previously believed, then fucking change your belief.
Jesus did not rebuke John in his weakness, but instead sent him a message that only a student of the scriptures, as John was, would recognize. He quoted from Isaiah chapter 61 and reminded John that he alone had fulfilled that messianic prophecy.
Right. Obviously fabricated, written after the fact in order to fulfill a prophecy, or at least point out how Jesus does fulfill prophecies. So it's a theological reason as to why he's even bringing this the fuck up.
We learn from these heroes of faith that God is patient with us when we desire to believe.
And other times he would rather put on a wife beater and totally beat your ass after he goes into a drunken rage. And that's the Old Testament. So as long as you don't read the Old Testament, God is good, maybe.
When we experience times of doubt, we must immerse ourselves in truth. We can bolster a sagging faith by reading scriptural accounts of God's miraculous interventions, listening to encouraging sermons, and reading books that appeal to our reason by authors such as C.S. Lewis or Lee Strobel. Podcasts by apologists such as William Lane Craig or Dr. John Lennox can also add fuel to the fire of our faith.
So basically, if I get this correct, if you're feeling doubts about whether or not you believe in God or the historical reliability of the New Testament or Old Testament or anything like that, or if you get this sneaky suspicion that maybe God isn't really all that great or good, then just dive headfirst into more indoctrination material. Like, just go head first. Believe without even questioning the people that he listed, especially Low Bar Bill Craig, who thinks that it's perfectly fine to genocide an entire people, including small children and babies, because it would be better for them to just not grow up pagan. I mean, never mind the fact that, you know, you can kill the entire group of people and take the children and re-indoctrinate them into your own faith so that they don't actually grow up pagan. Don't worry about that potential solution for that. No, just go ahead and kill the babies as well as all of the people there. Flat out murder them all. Like, apparently that's okay to Low Bar Bill Craig as long as God dictates that it should happen. So, I mean, yeah, if you want to re-indoctrinate yourself, go head first into the faith and just squash those doubts, then just listen to fucking Low Bar Bill Craig on repeat all the time. I mean, I feel like if you were looking to indoctrinate somebody that's resistant to the faith, having doubts of the faith, you would definitely strap them down like Clockwork Orange, feeding little teardrops into their eyes and make them watch fucking Lee Strobel for about 24 hours straight. That's the vision that I'm getting what this guy is saying right here.
But the greatest power to overcome doubt comes from the Holy Spirit himself, who bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God.
So this is always interesting because a lot of people don't understand this familial relationship in Paul's epistles that Paul communicates about, like the family of God, because obviously Paul is here saying that, you know, we are the children of God, meaning that in Paul's theology, at least, Jesus's death and resurrection procures this this familial relationship that we have with God, but we only attain that through Jesus, like through our belief in Jesus Christ. We believe in Jesus, we become a brother or sister to Jesus and are therefore in the family of God. Like, that's how that all works. A lot of people don't understand that, but I don't understand how this like provides any kind of proof whatsoever. Like, this is just an ad hoc claim about it. You would actually need to prove that we're all children of God. Like, you would need to prove these things, but he's not, because he just wants you to listen and believe. He's got you in that Clockwork Orange chair, feeding your eyes the little teardrop things, and he's telling you to just believe without considering any kind of doubts. Like, you just got to believe.
Romans chapter 8, verse 16. We can cry out as the man cried to Jesus, "I believe, Lord, help my unbelief." Mark chapter 9, verse 24. And we can expect him to answer.
So, I mean, and my entire time as a Christian, I simply never had that. I did not have any kind of experience that would have been like God speaking to me. Now, interesting point here, because I, as a religious person, I do remember at various times thinking that God had spoke to me. And I thought that God spoke to me like in just the mundane happenings in my life. Like, you know, if I got a speeding ticket, that was punishment for something. It was always negative things, by the way. Like anytime that God was speaking to me, it was definitely him shit talking me or punking me or something like that, is how I felt about it. So like God speaking to me, that was just me telling myself, oh, this is God speaking to me. I didn't hear voices or anything, but I had been taught that God speaking to you is just like mundane shit happening. A bird flies in front of your face. And it's like, oh my God, God's speaking to me with that white dove that just flew past my face. I'm either in a John Woo movie or God is telling me something. It's shit like that. And it's things of that nature that a lot of religious people convince themselves are messages from God. But the important aspect to focus on here is that it's the religious person that convinces themselves that God is talking to them. It's not actually God talking to them. And there's no way to prove that God is responsible for any mundane happenstance that occurs in your life. There's just no way to prove it. So there's no reason for you to think that God is talking to you in that way. When he says that, oh, God will speak to you, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about you convincing yourself that God is sending a message by some kind of rare occurrence or random occurrence, rather, happening. Like that's apparently a message from God. And, you know, we can see this in current socio-political environment here in the United States, because, you know, now you've got people saying that God protected Trump and that, you know, it was some kind of message. And that's going to convince a lot of people that God has selected Donald Trump to be the next president. The key, though, is that people have convinced themselves that God has selected him, or that God had sent a message, or that God protected Trump or something like that. These people have convinced themselves of God's messages. It's not actually been God's messages. We can't prove that God has sent any kind of message. And until we can, there's no way to know if anything is a God message. So there's no reason to believe that they are God's message. Well, heathens, that's going to be it for the video today. I hope that you enjoyed it. All in all, I say embrace your doubt. And I think that there are a lot of things, a lot of curious things about Christianity that should increase your doubt about the faith, and that your faith in God should be full of doubt. You should constantly be doubting things, not just God, but other things too. Like doubt things you hear in the news cycle. Have doubts that the news, like mainstream media or any of these outlets, are giving you like the real information. Not trying to say do your own research or anything like that, but I'm just saying have a healthy amount of doubt in your life, and you'll never be tricked into believing false things. All right. That's all that I'm saying. Have a healthy amount of doubt. I think that you should not have doubt when you've been given sufficient evidence for a conclusion. That at that point, you can put away your doubt, because it's been sufficiently proven that you should have no doubt. And only at that point should you put the doubt away. Don't listen to this fuckhead. Be doubtful either in your faith or just in your life in general. Be doubtful. Thank you, heathens, for watching today. If you will, please go down below and let me know what you thought about this video on doubt, religious doubt. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. While you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. And don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.